Part 1. Jake had never imagined that one evening, one of many spent in their modest home on the outskirts of Seattle, could mark the beginning of a profound change in his daily life. He returned from work, as always exhausted, with grocery bags in hand and his mind still tangled in the complexities of cables and servers. As an IT technician, his days in the office often blurred together. But that evening felt different. As soon as he stepped inside, he was greeted by the fragrant aroma of saffron rice that Mia was cooking. His wife, with her warm smile and those adorable dimples that could still melt his heart, shot him a conspiratorial glance and said in a theatrical tone, "Jake, how about we play a little tonight?" He kicked off his shoes, tossed his jacket onto the couch, and watched her with curiosity. "Play what?" he asked, laughing, thinking it was one of her usual antics to break the monotony. Mia had a knack for inventing ways to make even the dullest day interesting. "Trust me, it'll be fun. We'll blindfold you and let you be guided," she said with a mischievous grin, gesturing toward their bedroom. He shook his head, but her enthusiasm was infectious. After 3 years of marriage and living under the same roof with her mother, they needed something to shake up their routine. Mia's mother, Claudia, had been living with them since her husband passed away. She was an elegant woman for her age, always impeccably dressed. With eyes that seemed to see right through him and a calm yet assertive demeanor, she often felt more like an older sister to Mia than a mother. But cohabiting with all three of them wasn't always easy. There were shared spaces, unspoken rules, and silences that sometimes felt heavy. That evening, however, everything seemed lighter. Mia led him into the bedroom, had him sit on the bed, and took a silk scarf, the one with embroidered flowers that had been a gift from her mother, and gently covered his eyes. He sat there in silence as she whispered a few words and adjusted his arms with tenderness. Then she left the room, leaving him alone with his racing thoughts. Perhaps she was just preparing a surprise, or maybe she wanted to test his patience. He heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, but he couldn't tell who it was. He strained to decipher every sound, every rustle, but the blindfold deprived him of any reference point. A game? He thought, nothing more. Yet something felt strange, a different scent wafted through the air, not the light floral fragrance of Mia, but something deeper, more mature, like lavender and sandalwood. It was a familiar aroma, though he couldn't place it immediately. Then he remembered, it was the scent Claudia used. He had picked it out himself once at the airport to help her choose a gift for a friend. His heart began to race, but he tried to remain calm. Perhaps it was just an impression, or maybe Mia was playing with his perceptions. After a few minutes, someone gently removed the blindfold. When he opened his eyes, Mia was there, smiling, sitting next to him on the bed. "So, did you like the surprise?" she asked. "It was interesting," he replied, trying to read her eyes for any hint of what he might be missing. Mia chuckled, but before he could say anything else, Claudia knocked on the door, holding a cup of chamomile tea. "Sorry to interrupt," she said in a neutral tone, placing the cup on the nightstand. She glanced at him for a moment before turning to leave. Mia appeared calm, but 1,000 thoughts raced through Jake's mind. What was happening? Was it just an innocent game, or was there something more? He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the air felt charged with unspoken tension. The next morning, Jake noticed something unsettling during breakfast. Claudia was avoiding his gaze, her usual warmth replaced by a quiet reserve. She moved with her usual precision, but there was a slight hesitation in her actions. In contrast, Mia seemed to be in high spirits, humming softly as she poured coffee into Jake's cup, her smile bright and carefree. Jake remained silent, but a strange unease settled in his stomach. It wasn't suspicion or jealousy, it was the sense that something had shifted in the delicate balance of their household, something subtle yet palpable. That evening, as Jake returned home from work, he walked slowly through the front door. Mia was still out, likely running errands. Claudia sat in the living room, reading with her glasses perched on her nose and a soft blanket draped over her legs. She greeted him with a nod, but Jake felt a surge of words he wanted to say, questions he wanted to ask. However, he sensed it wasn't the right moment. Instead, he retreated to his room, replaying the previous night in his mind, the scent that lingered, the way Mia's voice had seemed both familiar and different. He needed to understand, but he didn't want to disrupt the fragile equilibrium. He had already decided he wouldn't ignore the feeling that something was changing in their home. The following days passed with an air of normalcy, yet a latent tension grew within him, as if everything that had once been clear and calm had suddenly become murky. Jake found himself lost in thought, mulling over that night, Mia's voice, and the intense fragrance he had sensed. The more he tried to rationalize it, the more doubts crept into his mind. One evening, he returned home early, having requested personal time off from his boss. He wanted to observe, to see if his instincts were right. As he stepped inside, he noticed that Mia was still out. Claudia was in the kitchen, working on a pie crust. He paused at the threshold, taking in the sight of her rolled-up sleeves, a sunflower-patterned apron tied snugly around her waist, and a light sheen of sweat glistening on her forehead. She hummed a soft tune from the 80s, one he recognized from the times she had played it while ironing. Unsure whether to speak or remain silent, he hesitated. "Need a hand?" he finally asked. Claudia turned quickly, surprise flickering across her face. "Oh, you're home already? I thought you'd be later," she replied, her tone steady but with an undercurrent of nervousness. Jake shook his head, offering a smile. "I finished early. Plus, I was hoping for your pie." Claudia smiled back, and for a few moments, they cooked together in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, tense. Their hands brushed against each other as they sliced apples, and she instinctively pulled back, a gesture laden with unspoken words. When Mia returned, she found them seated at the table with a cup of tea between them. She raised an eyebrow, a playful smile on her lips. "What a lovely domestic scene," she teased, though her tone held a hint of curiosity. "Did you two conspire to make me dinner?" "It was Claudia's pie," Jake replied, and Mia laughed. "Then I want 2 slices." That night, as they settled into bed, Mia turned to Jake, her expression serious. "Jake, do you trust me?" she asked softly, almost in a whisper. He paused, taken aback for a moment. "Of course I trust you," he replied, though a part of him felt a crack forming within. She nodded, then added, "And do you trust Claudia?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" he asked, confusion swirling in his mind. "I mean, we've lived together for years. She helps us, supports us, but I know it's not easy for you," Mia explained. "Sometimes when strange feelings or misunderstandings arise, it's better to talk about them." Her gaze was serious yet gentle. He took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "Mia, if you have something to say, please do. I don't want to live with doubts or misunderstandings." She exhaled deeply, the weight of the moment hanging in the air between them. The air was thick with unspoken words as Jake sat across from Lucia in their cozy kitchen, the scent of freshly baked apple pie wafting through the room. He could feel the tension simmering just beneath the surface, a weight that had settled in since that fateful evening. "Have you noticed anything different?" Lucia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She bit her lip, her eyes searching his for understanding. "Mom sometimes feels lonely. She doesn't show it, but I know. She lost Dad when I was young, raised me on her own, sacrificed so much. Maybe that night she just wanted to remember what it felt like to be desired. Jake turned to her, his heart racing. But nothing happened, right? I swear. He leaned forward, trying to read her expression. Lucia, I'm not blaming anyone, but I need to know, were you the one who blindfolded me that night? Lucia hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. Yes and no. I was there at first, but then I left the room. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. I thought it was just a surprise, a game. But then the silence grew heavy. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. I didn't want her to do it. But she did, Jake replied, frustration creeping into his tone. She thought it was just a joke to see if you'd understand. But we crossed a line. He stood up, pacing the small kitchen. Lucia, this isn't something you just laugh off. I don't even know how I feel, she admitted, rising to meet him. Jake, I swear I didn't want to hurt you, but I don't know what to think anymore. Mom isn't a bad person, you know that, right? Just then, Claudia knocked on the door, her voice breaking through the tension. Sorry, I heard raised voices. Is everything okay? Lucia opened the door, her face a mask of forced calm. Mom, come in. Claudia stepped inside, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression serious. Jake, can we talk honestly? He nodded, his heart pounding. That night, I made a mistake, Claudia began, her voice steady. I shouldn't have entered that game. It was a lapse in judgment. I didn't mean to hurt you or create confusion between you and Lucia, but when I felt that freedom, I let go. I'm sorry. Her sincerity was palpable, and Jake could see the regret in her eyes. I'm not looking for excuses, just forgiveness. Lucia took Jake's hand, her grip firm. If you want, we can take a step back. We can pause, but I don't want to lose you over this mistake. He looked between the two women, the confusion still swirling within him, but clarity began to emerge. Sometimes people make wrong choices, not out of malice, but out of loneliness, and need to feel connected to something, he said finally. I'm not leaving, but we need to be honest with each other, all three of us, without games or secrets. Claudia nodded, her expression resolute. I promise. Lucia wrapped her arms around him, and in that moment, he felt a shift. Even though something had been altered, perhaps they could still find a way to start anew. The days that followed were strange, a new kind of silence enveloping their home. Each word felt heavy, as if they had to be weighed before being spoken. None of them knew how to navigate this new dynamic, and even the simplest acts, passing the bread at dinner or asking about the day, were tinged with a newfound caution, as if they were walking on thin ice. Lucia was always kind, even more affectionate than usual. He noticed her efforts to prepare elaborate meals, her attempts to steer conversations toward light topics, and her laughter that seemed a touch too loud in the quiet house. It was clear she was trying to restore balance, and he appreciated it, but he couldn't ignore the tension that lingered. Claudia, on the other hand, had grown quieter. She didn't avoid his presence, but she seemed to want to blend into the background. She would rise early, go grocery shopping alone, and spend hours in the garden tending to the plants on the balcony, even in the light drizzle. In the evenings, she would return to her room late, a book clutched in her hands, her smile gentle but weary. One evening, Lucia suggested they go for a walk. It was one of those spring nights when the air was crisp and the stars twinkled brightly overhead. As they strolled through the neighborhood, the weight of their earlier conversation hung in the air, but the beauty of the night offered a momentary escape from the tension that had settled in their lives. The air was fragrant with jasmine as families strolled home, the evening light casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. George and Lucia walked side by side, their steps aimless, the weight of their earlier conversation still heavy in the air. George paused, turning to Lucia, his expression earnest. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady yet soft. "We can't pretend nothing happened." Lucia nodded, her brow furrowing slightly. "I know, but it's not easy. I take my share of the responsibility. I underestimated everything. I thought it was just a way to break the monotony, to do something different, but I didn't consider the consequences, especially for Mom." They found a bench near a flower bed, the city lights flickering behind the windows of the nearby apartments. "Do you really think she acted just for fun? Just to feel alive?" George asked, searching her eyes for understanding. Lucia hesitated before responding. "I think Mom has more fragility than she lets on. She's a strong woman, but she's been living for others for too long. First Dad, then me, and now us. Maybe she just wanted to feel included, even if it was in the wrong way." "And you?" George pressed gently. "How do you feel?" "Divided," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I love you, and at the same time, I can't condemn her. I know there's genuine affection between the three of us, even if everything feels so confused right now." He wrapped his arms around her, the complexity of their situation swirling around them like the evening breeze. For the first time in a long while, their conversation felt like a candid exchange between adults, stripped of pretense. They returned home with a silent agreement to find a way to restore balance through honesty and respect. 2 days later, Claudia asked to speak with them. It was Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through the kitchen curtains, the rich aroma of coffee filling the air. They sat together at the table, hands wrapped around steaming mugs. Claudia cleared her throat, her expression serious yet vulnerable. "I know I messed up. I know I've disappointed both of you, but I'm asking just one thing. Don't let this mistake destroy what we've built together," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not asking you to forget, just to forgive. I promise I'll respect any boundaries you decide on." Lucia looked at her in silence before nodding slowly. George took a moment before responding. "I don't want us to live in regret, but we need clarity, new rules, and honesty." They talked for a long time, deciding to stay together as a family but with greater attention to each other's spaces, limits, and needs. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was honest. When they finally stood up from the table, George felt a flicker of hope that perhaps a new beginning was possible. In the days that followed, things began to change slowly. The tension in the house began to ease. Claudia resumed cooking her favorite dishes, but she no longer sought George's company during ambiguous moments. Lucia seemed more at peace, as if a part of the burden she had carried was finally shared. George, too, tried to reclaim his role, to rediscover the man he had been before the events had swept him away. It wasn't easy. Some evenings, he found himself lost in thought, replaying everything in his mind, questioning whether he had handled things the right way. But then he would look at Lucia or hear Claudia laughing as she chatted with a neighbor from the balcony, and he thought that maybe, just maybe, not everything was lost. One evening, while sorting through old photographs in the living room, he stumbled upon a picture of the three of them from a trip to the lake 2 years prior. They were all smiling, arms wrapped around each other, and in that snapshot, there was a precious simplicity that now felt even more significant. Perhaps it was time to seek that simplicity again. There are moments in life when you realize that everything, even what seemed irreparably broken, can find a new equilibrium. Not a return to the past, but something different built on the remnants of what was and the fragments discovered along the way. And he believed that was exactly what had begun to happen for them. In the kitchen, the weeks passed in a quiet rhythm, as if each of them needed time to sort through their own thoughts and feelings. No one forced anything anymore, no games, no provocations, no ambiguous tension. Instead, there were small daily gestures shared with newfound awareness and respect. Claudia began to venture out more often. She had enrolled in a pottery class, claiming it made her feel useful and creative again. Occasionally, she returned home with clay-stained hands and a sparkle in her eyes that hinted at something beyond mere satisfaction. One evening, she proudly presented a lopsided, quirky vase she had crafted, placing it in the center of the dining table. "It may not be perfect, but it's mine," she laughed, and no one dared to contradict her. Lucia, too, had started to open up more, both to George and to her mother. He would sometimes overhear them chatting softly in the living room, like two friends sharing secrets without judgment. It was as if a new bond had formed between them, one born from the crisis but stronger and more genuine. As for George, he had stopped seeking clear-cut answers. Not everything could be divided into right or wrong. Some experiences, even the most bewildering, served to reveal what had been ignored, the need to be seen, to be heard, to feel included, to not be alone. One evening in May, Lucia suggested they visit the lake, the same one from the photo George had found. He readily agreed. They set off early, the three of them, for the first time in months doing something together outside the confines of their home. The drive was peaceful, with music playing softly on the radio and the road gliding smoothly beneath the tires. When they arrived, the lake was calm, bathed in a golden light that seemed suspended in time. They spread a blanket on the grass and sat in silence for a while, simply watching the water. "Do you remember?" Claudia pointed to the shore. "That's where we all got our feet wet because we didn't realize how slippery it was." Lucia giggled. "And you lost a shoe, right?" George chuckled, "Yes, and it floated back up half an hour later, bobbing like a little boat." In that moment, as they all laughed together, he understood that there were things they couldn't change or erase, but they could choose how to live with them, whether as wounds or as lessons. Lucia took his hand. Claudia settled beside them, hugging her knees. They watched the sun slowly dip behind the hills in silence. Words weren't necessary. There was a new understanding among them, built on respect, shared silences, and unspoken promises. From that day forward, their lives found a simpler shape. Days flowed without too many expectations, but with small moments that reminded them of who they were and what they had become. Sometimes they cooked together, while other times, each retreated to their own space. But the weight of tension had lifted. There was a different lightness to their existence, hard-won but genuine. A few days ago, Claudia returned from the market with a small lavender plant. "I saw it and thought it would look lovely on the balcony," she said. He inhaled its fragrance and smiled. It was the same scent he had caught that evening months ago, but now it held a different meaning. It was no longer a sign of confusion but a memory they had passed through to become who they were. Lucia planted the lavender in a blue pot, the same one her mother had shaped. George placed it next to their old picture frame with the photo from the lake, and every time he looked at it, he thought about how family isn't always linear. Sometimes it's made up of mistakes, difficult choices, silences, and new beginnings. But if there is love, even if imperfect, there is always a way to stay together. As the summer approached, the lavender thrived on the balcony, its scent wafting through the open windows, a reminder of their journey. They found joy in the little things, sharing meals, gardening, and even quiet moments of reflection. The laughter that once felt distant now echoed freely in their home, a testament to their resilience. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, George looked at Claudia and Lucia, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the candles. "You know," he began, "I never thought we could get to this point after everything that happened." Claudia nodded, her eyes bright. "It's not about forgetting, It's about moving forward together. Lucia smiled, her hand resting on the table. We've all grown, haven't we? It's like the lavender. It had to be planted, nurtured, and allowed to flourish. George felt a swell of gratitude. They had weathered the storm, and now they were learning to embrace the calm. As the sun set, casting a golden hue over their home, George realized that they had forged a new path, one that honored their past while looking toward the future. They were not the same as before, but perhaps that was the beauty of it all. They had found a way to be together, imperfectly but wholeheartedly, and that was enough. Subscribe to the channel,